They went inside the bomb shelter. First of all, they shot everyone that was in the pathway, and then they came inside and they started shooting everyone inside. I dropped my phone, and then what I remember is the pace of the gunshots. It was not like, it was boom, 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 boom. And then the shooting stopped, and because we were on the road, we could hear them going out, slamming the car door, and driving away. And so I looked to my friends, they were alive. And then I looked to my left to the girl that was holding my hand. She was lifeless and she was dead. Her head was like this on my shoulder. I remembered my leg really hurting, and then I looked to my leg and I had this dead body all over my leg. We were around 50 people. After the first shooting, I called my dad to tell him I'm alive, and I was like, Dad, there is dead people, you have to call the police, you have to tell them to get to us. Like, he's processing the whole thing during the conversation.
איפה את?
תשלח משטרה לפה. אבא, יש מלא מתים, תשלח משטרה לפה.
אני שולח, מתים?
אבא, בבקשה, תשלח משטרה לפה.
אני שולח עכשיו, ממי, תהיי רגועה, תשארי איתי על הקו, אל תנתקי ממני את הקו, טוב? תהיי בשקט.
And then there is like a switch that happens to him. He goes like, play dead, just play dead, just hang up the phone with me, just play dead.
יובלי, רגע, ויש שם מחבלים עדיין?
מסתובבים, אבא, תשלחו ניידות.
תהיי מתה, יובלי, תהיי מתה, תנתקי את הטלפון ממני, תהיי מתה.
ביי.
I've always had an interest in Eurovision ever since I was a child. I found the whole pageantry of it quite fascinating. The stage sets, the music, the choreography. There was something there for everyone. And if you won Eurovision, there was a guaranteed #1 song for you in the UK, and probably your home country also. It was almost a tradition to reach the top spot for a few weeks. ABBA, Bucks Fizz, Johnny Logan, they all achieved that. Ireland, along with Sweden, holds the record for the most Eurovision titles, with 7 in total. And RTE always put on a great production. The highlight of all these productions was, of course, in 1994, when Riverdance revealed itself to the world at the Point Theatre in Dublin. It was an extraordinary television event, spearheaded by Michael Flatley and Jean Butler, 2 extraordinary talents. It was like Italian 90 all over again, such was the pride in this artistic endeavour, and in some ways it broadcast a new Ireland to the world. A few years ago, Riverdance was being staged at the Gaiety Theatre in Dublin. My wife's parents were coming to visit from Poland, and I knew that her father, on account of his love for music, would be ecstatic to see the show. Anytime I go to visit, such is his love of music that the two of us have this thing where we carefully go through his extensive vinyl LP collection and discuss various bands and artists and the merits of each. I had never seen Riverdance myself apart from what's available online, and so I bought good seats at the Gaiety in a box overlooking the stage. It was a special occasion, so why not go the whole hog, I thought. I genuinely did not know what to expect, and right from the get-go I was floored. It was riveting, and I didn't want it to end. It didn't matter that it was a scaled-down production to accommodate the smaller venue. Greatness is greatness, and that can never be hidden, in the same way that a great song should also sound great on just acoustic guitar. It was my first time also in the Gaiety, and I thought of all those legends who had walked that stage since 1871. Lily Langtry, Noel Coward, Cyril Cusack, Julie Andrews, and many others. The atmosphere was electric. I turned my head to the right to look at my father-in-law. So moved was he by what he was witnessing in this once-in-a-lifetime moment that tears were streaming down his face. What was on display was the spirit and power of art through music and dance, bypassing and circumventing any differences among the 1,100 people present, bringing them together in one accord, the Riverdance Accord. During such events, all discord is left at the door. This is how it should be, and we also see it at the Olympics. At least this was the founding purpose of the Olympics and Eurovision. Over the years, Israel have also won Eurovision 4 times between 1978 and 2018. When Eurovision opened up to the former Soviet-controlled states in latter years, it seemed to drift off course, and voting then seemed to become more political in that participants started to vote preferentially for their neighbouring states, with whom they had some history or connection. The vote was also open to the public through a phone text system, an option which I personally disagree with. The public are dumb in the collective sense and are frequently swayed by national or religious affiliations. Although after last year's vote, when much of the public vote went to Israel, I'm not so sure anymore. Maybe they are smarter than I gave them credit for. It certainly showed the chasm there now exists between the public and those holding the levers of power, including those so-called judges on our national voting panel for something as benign as a song contest. They, of course, are the self-proclaimed experts. However, the Eurovision no longer seems to be about songs, but more about image and pontification. Satan's Thug, Ireland's representative last year, was full of pontification, crocodile tears and hostility towards Eden Golan, Israel's representative, wanting her kicked out of the event. Of course, mediocrity is always hostile towards genuine talent and ability. Eden Golan's song, Hurricane, was outstanding, as was her defiant performance in the face of such devilish animosity. The truth is that if you are full of the devil, then that bitter spirit that controls you will make itself known, as it craves attention. Ireland's official adjudication panel voted against Israel, as was to be expected. The Irish public, to their credit, voted overwhelmingly in favour. Eden Golan had on display the very qualities that Satan's Thug lacked: class, composure, courage, and humility. Israel's entry this year is to be sung by a young lady, Yuval Raphael. Yuval was one of over 50 young people who hid in a death shelter on October the 7th, and one of only 11 who walked out, while all the remainder were murdered right next to you and on top of her. She hid for 8 hours under their dead bodies. RTE, the Irish national public broadcaster, who in times past made us proud with their Riverdance production, has now morphed from a Dr. Jekyll into a Mr. Hyde. In their wisdom, they started campaigning for the removal of Yuval Raphael of Israel from the competition, although it is cloaked in the language of, quote, wanting discussion, end of quote, on Israel's participation in the event. It is not the role of a public broadcaster to instigate such political activism, although in recent times it has become their modus operandi. Think Ukraine, climate change, and Orange Man Bad. It is pathetic. RTE has become a monstrosity that is no longer recognisable, and no longer reflects its founding remit. The illusion that RTE is any kind of neutral entity should now be well and truly shattered, especially if you are one that has been standing in the no man's land of uncertainty. The veil has been lifted, and there are no excuses now to see it otherwise. RTE has utterly failed in its role as public broadcaster. But it matters not. We are still going to be subjected to it for years to come. It is best ignored at this stage. In the broader sense, if you are against Israel, you are by default for Hamas and everything it stands for. There is no middle ground, no neutrality. When you hear a politician feign concern for the innocent civilians and they cry out for a ceasefire because they don't want Israel to win the war, they are for Hamas. When you hear of those who speak in the language of occupation or support the Occupied Territories Bill that the Irish establishment are now trying to push over the finish line, they are for Hamas. When you see those who claim to be Christians or unwavering Catholics on social media, but at the same time continually express their unbiblical anti-Jewish sentiments by what they say or what they upload, they are for Hamas. These pseudo-Christians, blinded by their hatred of Jewish people, read things into Scripture that are not there to justify their ungodly position. The Jew killed Christ, they exclaim. No. Jesus says in John chapter 10, verse 18, quote, "No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again." End of quote. Salt water and fresh water cannot come from the same source. You cannot worship Christ with your tongue and then from the same mouth curse the Jewish people. Gemma O'Doherty, whose online content continually promotes her fake version of history, would do well to remember that. God's promise to Abram in Genesis 12 and to all his descendants is an eternal one. It is unconditional. In other words, there are no strings attached. In Romans 11, Paul makes it clear that God is not finished with the Jewish people. I've learned in life that sometimes it's better to keep your mouth shut rather than speak about things in ignorance, things of which you don't have a full understanding. God has his own agenda, whether we like that or not. In Genesis 12, as part of his promise to Abraham and his descendants, God says, quote, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse." Imagine being cursed by God. Think about that for a moment. Justin Barrett wasn't thinking about that, or about much else, when he gave an impromptu car crash street interview to Ezra Levant of Rebel Media recently in Dublin. It was difficult to watch. Cringeworthy and crass comes to mind. But then again, I wasn't really surprised. There's been a significant rise of anti-Semitism of late in this country, much of it driven by certain individuals online. You can also see it in the comment sections in one form or another. Many conservative-leaning commentators in Ireland have in recent years been referring to current events, notably since COVID, as a spiritual war or spiritual battle. That being the case, and if you believe in such things, maybe then it's best to be more careful with your words, more measured when tempted to run down Jewish people or the nation of Israel, even as a just-in-case strategy. Another Barrett, Richard Boyd Barrett, does not hide his hatred of Israel either, and regularly speaks of it. In the Irish Times on December 4th, 2023, he is quoted as saying the following, quote, "The only thing you can do with a state like that is resist it and bring it down. This is what has to happen with the filthy, apartheid, racist, colonial settler regime that is Israel. The only answer to this is intifada." End of quote. Some weeks ago, Boyd Barrett announced that he had been diagnosed with throat cancer, and upon hearing that verse on blessings and curses came to my mind in that moment. Furthermore, following that street interview at Rebel Media, where he disparaged and spoke ill of the Jewish people, with venom, while hiding behind some spurious theological position, the other Barrett, Justin, only a few days later, was hospitalized following a serious heart attack, from which I hope he recovers. I'm not saying there's a connection in these two cases because coincidences do happen. But what I am saying is that if you are choosing to curse what God in Scripture has decided to bless, then you have set yourself up in opposition to God. When you set yourself up against God like that, don't be surprised if you get blowback.